Hello, this is Mike with Urban Legends and Mythology. It is officially autumn outside, and that means we're getting ready for the Halloween season. And to kick it off, I am doing a classic horror story. On this episode, I am discussing the real truth behind one of the greatest horror films that was ever written. This is the truth behind The Exorcist. And believe it or not, this film was actually inspired by a true story. And on top of that, the practice of exorcism is an actual practice that takes place within the Catholic Church. We will deep dive into that practice as well. We're also going to probably touch on some demonology and touch on some other exorcisms as well. However, the main focus is on the inspiration for the film The Exorcist, which went on to launch an entire genre of films within the horror kind of genre. I know it's a little redundant, but this is an iconic film. I want to dive into the history. I want to dive into exorcism and demonology. It's going to be a fun episode. Hell, Halloween's coming up. Let's do this. But real quick, I am the right level of drunk at this moment. I do want to give a huge shout out to the followers, the subscribers, the people who are like literally paying me to create this thing. You listeners are the reason why I do this and the whole reason why the Death Bunny Squad even exists, and I truly thank you. But enough of that, let's get into The Exorcist. This is going to be fun. So we all basically know the film The Exorcist, right? So there's this chick, her name's Regan. She gets like possessed by this demon, and this demon is like, your mother sucks dick in hell. And she's like crab walking down the stairs and like puking up like green bile, and it's like, I need an old priest and a young priest, and like it's freaking awesome, you know? It's literally one of my favorite horror movies of all time. And the reason it's because it's one of the few horror movies that actually truly scared the absolute fuck out of me when I first watched it. And even to this day, I think about it and it is a scary ass movie. But what if I told you that that was all based on an actual event that took place in, I believe it's like the 40s, and I'm going to get into that event now. So as always, let's start right at the beginning. So I'm going to start with Ronald Doe, and yes, that's actually a pseudonym. We don't actually know who this kid actually was. So Ronald was born into a German Lutheran family, and during the 1940s, the family lived in Cottage City, Maryland. Now, Roland was an only child and depended on the adults in his household for playmates, and he primarily depended on his Aunt Harriet. Now, his Aunt Harriet was kind of a spiritualist, occultist. She was into that stuff, and she introduced Roland to the Ouija board, which he expressed interest in. Now, for context, a Ouija board is basically just an oracle. It's usually used in spiritualist practices, seances, etc. And since it's an oracle, it doesn't really dial into a specific presence. It's just there to pick up whatever presence will come through. So it could be a ghost of someone who passed away, or it could be a demon. And a lot of people believe that in this case it was some kind of demon. And since Ouija boards are essentially oracles, you do have to be very respectful when you're speaking with the entity, because if that entity is a demon and you piss it off, yeah, it's gonna possess you or wreak some havoc in your life. And a lot of skeptics will say, well, Ouija boards are fake, it's just the ideomotor response, it's basically a bunch of garbage, there's no entity that's gonna come through it and possess you or haunt you. And I say to those people that, yeah, it is mostly ideomotor response, but you don't want to fuck with these things. These things can summon some pretty weird, crazy stuff. And in this particular case, it is believed that Roland's interest in the Ouija board along with his Aunt Harriet was what caused this demon to come through. And it's because shortly after Aunt Harriet's death, the family started experiencing strange noises and furniture moving of its own accord, and ordinary objects such as vases flying or levitating when the boy was nearby. Now, while a lot of people can contribute that to poltergeist activity, which could have manifested in the young boy when his close friend and confidant passed away, it's not unusual. Poltergeist activity usually does manifest in young teenagers during a traumatic incident such as a death of a family member. especially a close family member, it's generally believed that this wasn't actually poltergeist activity manifesting from the boy itself. Instead, they believed it may have been a demon. So while the family was experiencing this, they actually turned to their Lutheran pastor, a guy named Luther Miles Schultz, for help. Now, he was interested in parapsychology, and he actually spent a night with the young boy, and he observed him. And from his observations, he witnessed household objects and furniture seemingly moving by themselves. And even as the young boy slept, these objects were moving around, they were flying through the air, and it was a very scary experience. So he actually suggests to the parents that they consult a Catholic priest because in his mind, this is a classic case of demonic possession. And the Catholic Church being really the only church that really deals in issues of demonic possession, they were like, yeah, we'll look into it. Now, as just a side note, yeah, I do know I give the Catholics a lot of shit for basically their practices because I do not believe in or respect that religion. However, when it comes to demonology, demon possession, they're the ones that you would go to for this subject because they are literally experts in it. These guys actually probably know more about demonic possession and how to fight demonic possession better than anybody else on the planet, so I do have to give them props for that. And to be honest, when it does come to cases of demonic possession and exorcism, they actually do follow the scientific method and take a very scientific approach to it. They don't just run in there half-cocked, they actually take a very psychological approach to make sure that it's not some kind of mental illness or something that can be cured with modern medicine before they'll even attempt to do an exorcism. Basically, they will only perform an exorcism only if they cannot find a medical excuse for why this person is acting this way or doing these things. And they will conduct a rigorous amount of psychological and medical tests before actually performing an exorcism. So there you go. For once in a rare blue moon, the Catholic Church actually does something right. And before we really continue with our story, let's actually dive into some history and explain exactly what an exorcism is and why it exists in the first place. So to put it very simply, an exorcism is the religious or spiritual practice of evicting demons or malevolent spirits from a person or an area. And it's actually a very ancient and universal practice that we see amongst most humans who are religiously affiliated in some way. The word exorcism actually comes from the ancient Greek, and it means binding by oath. And in almost every culture where you have this idea of demonic spirits or malicious entities, this practice, this ritual of exorcism tends to pop up. So it's not too surprising that it pops up in the Catholic faith early on. Now, depending on the spiritual beliefs of the exorcist, this ritual can take place in various ways. One way is they can force the entity to swear an oath to leave the person alone or to leave the area, and they can kind of bind the entity or the demon or the spirit or whatever by that oath. Or the more common practice, which is the primary common practice today, especially in Catholicism, Christianity, etc., the one performing the exorcism can demand that the demon or spirit or entity depart in the name of a higher power, in the Catholic's case, that higher power being either Jesus or God. So essentially in the Catholic sense, it's literally when the church asks publicly and authoritatively in the name of Jesus Christ that a person or object be protected against the power of the evil one and withdrawn from his dominion. That is essentially what an exorcism is. And as I said before, the Catholic Church, they don't really go off half-cocked. In their canon law, an exorcism can only be performed by a Catholic priest or someone higher, and only after the express written permission of the bishop, and after several medical examinations have taken place which rule out any mental or physical illnesses. They'll also do things like background checks and look into their personal histories to see if they have any histories of abuse or drug and alcohol dependence. And they'll even offer psychological counseling sessions and work with doctors in order to just rule out everything else. However, they are at the same time looking for a very specific set of symptoms. Now, these symptoms are usually signs of demonic invasion, and depending on the demon, different signs can arise, but this is just a general list of those symptoms. One common symptom is the using of languages unknown to the person or the people around them. having extraordinary strength or resistance to physical restraint, knowledge of events or people that the person could have not possibly known, an extreme aversion to holy objects like crucifixes or rosary beads or Bibles, or also an extreme aversion to holy places like churches, violent and aggressive behavior including self-harm and mutilation, and any ailments or conditions that really cannot be treated or diagnosed medically. Now, there are other symptoms that go along with it, and it varies depending on whatever demon you're dealing with, but those are the primary ones that most exorcists look for. And it does make sense why the Catholic Church does go through all these steps before they will perform an exorcism, because they take this sacramental extremely seriously, and they don't want to screw it up. And it actually comes from this modernist idea that they don't actually want to inflict any further harm onto somebody who may be suffering from a severe mental illness like schizophrenia or something like that. You know, for example, if somebody has, like, let's say multiple personality disorder and one of these personalities is extremely violent, they don't want to provoke that other personality or undo any psychological progress that has been made with that person medically. And like I said, that is one thing I can at least praise the Catholics for, because they really do take a methodical, scientific approach to it. Because while that practice does exist in other denominations and other sects, they'll usually just go off half-cocked and not take all these steps and procedures and just go straight into the ritual. And in some of those cases, they have done more harm than good. Instead of rooting out a psychological disorder, they end up exacerbating something. But back to our story of Ronald Doe. So as we know, this young boy whose aunt had previously passed away, he's living in this house and they're starting to experience all this paranormal phenomena. And this entity who is creating this paranormal phenomena only seems to manifest when Ronald is around, and it takes a extreme interest in Ronald himself. So initially his mother believes that this is all connected to his dead aunt, and that his dead aunt is maybe haunting the house, and they attempt, while using the Ouija board, to reach out to this entity, believing it's this dead aunt. And their initial hope is that they could reach out and tell them, hey, can you move on and leave this family alone? Well, that only escalates things, because remember how I said that a Ouija board is like an oracle? Well, they weren't actually communicating with who they thought they were communicating with. Most likely they ended up communicating with a malevolent demon who didn't appreciate being told, hey, can you go away and leave us alone? So this phenomena is escalating, and we're seeing these cases of objects being thrown around, and he reports that he hears someone walking in his room at night, and he wakes up to see not only scratches on his bedpost, but scratches on his body seemingly manifesting out of nowhere. And that's when they get a hold of that local minister who observes him, and then he reaches out to these Jesuit priests, and they all kind of decide that maybe if the boy and the family were to convert from Lutheranism to Catholicism, that thus might make the entity go away. So naturally, believing all this to be true, they convert and they attempt to have the young boy baptized. However, during the ritual, he responds to it with this unbridled rage. And at one point, this outburst of rage becomes so bad that the boy's parents actually have him confined to a mental hospital because they don't really know what's going on. However, the psychiatrist who was brought in to kind of examine him and figure out what's going on was completely unsuccessful in this attempt. His symptoms just didn't line up to anything known to this medical professional, so he was just stumped. So the next thing the family attempted was, hey, maybe if we get him out of that house, get him out of that environment and move into another house, maybe these spirits, these entities will leave him alone and go away for once and for all. And that does not work either. The events just continue. So in a final Hail Mary, they decide, okay, let's call in this priest and perform an exorcism. So 2 priests were called upon to perform this exorcism, and these 2 priests would be the primary ones who would take the lead roles in performing these exorcisms on the young boy. And the thing about Catholic exorcisms is, once a priest takes up an exorcism, he has to see it through to the very end. And it's never finished in a single session. It can take several sessions over several years to defeat this entity. And that priest or that team of priests, they will fight that demonic entity entity to the end until it's either banished or until it kills them. Because once they take that first step, this leads down a path of spiritual warfare, and if a priest were to just give up halfway through, then that demonic entity will come after him, and it won't stop pursuing him until the very end. It's literally spiritual warfare, which is why once a priest gets involved in this, he stays with it until the very end, until he's 100% sure that that entity has been banished. And if for whatever reason he happens to die during this spiritual warfare, he knows that he has a team with him who can take up the cause and continue the fight. So for this first exorcism, a Roman Catholic priest by the name of Edward Hughes would be the primary one to perform it, and this would be performed at the Georgetown University Hospital, which was a Jesuit kind of hospital. So generally one of the first things you do in an exorcism is you restrain the person that you're going to perform the exorcism on, mostly to keep them from committing any kind of self-harm. So Reverend Hughes, he straps the boy down to the bed and he starts to recite some of these incantations that you hear during exorcism. They're basically prayers. And while this priest is praying over him, he's naturally violently thrashing around in this bed trying to resist, and during this thrashing, he actually managed to get out of one of the restraints. He then breaks off a piece of the bed, which gives him access to a spring, which he rips out of the mattress, and he uses it to slash across the shoulders of the priest. And with that incident, the first session ends, and they go to regroup. Now, a few days later, Ronald, he's still in this hospital, and he wakes up one day, and he's covered in scratches, and across his stomach is the word Louis. Now his mother interprets this as a sign that they should go to St. Louis where they have family, and maybe that can help them overcome this demonic possession. So they travel to St. Louis, and a family member who was actually a cousin who was attending St. Louis University at the very time of Ronald's struggles, she puts them in touch with a Father Walter Halloran and a Reverend William Bowerden, and they actually consult with the president of the university, who gives the go-ahead along with the help of several assistants to perform further exorcisms on this boy. So now he has this whole team of priests who are gonna come and perform this exorcism. They're entering spiritual battle, and these priests, they actually report the same stuff that was seen during the first exorcism a month prior in Maryland. They witnessed scratches appearing on the boy's body and the mattress violently shaking. However, amid all these bizarre happenings, Bowerden and Halloran, according to the reports, would notice a pattern in Ronald's behavior. During the day, he was calm and normal, but it was after night when he settled in for bed, that's when the strange behaviors and screaming and wild outbursts and stuff would happen. So this entity was only attacking at night, seemingly. They also noticed that he would enter a trance-like state and start making sounds in a guttural voice, which was not his own voice. It was the voice of something else. They also reported that they saw objects flying around and moving around the room by themselves whenever the boy was present, and that at the sight of any kind of religious artifact or sacred object, he would thrash out in these violent, raging fits. They would also see a pitchfork-shaped pattern of red lines moving from his thigh down towards his ankle, and at one point a red X appeared on his chest, which the priests interpreted as the Roman number 10, and it led some to believe that the boy was possessed by up to 10 different demons. And these types of incidents and crazy events happened every night for a month straight, while the team of priests were all trying to get a grip on it, and while the parents were basically freaking out. However, these priests never gave up. They continued the exorcism night after night, all the way until the evening of March 20th, 1949, when it grew to new extremes. It reached an unhealthy new level. So the night of this exorcism, it was like something from a horror film. It went all out. It started with him pissing on the bed, screaming and cursing at the priest, throwing fits, going into violent rages. He started speaking in Latin. He was vomiting all over the place and spitting in the priest's face. And even when he did speak, it was in this really deep, unfamiliar voice. And this extremely violent exorcism goes on all night long. But it was after this one when his parents had decided that he needed some more serious treatment, so they transferred him to the Alexian Brothers Hospital in St. Louis to get that more serious treatment. Meanwhile, these exorcisms are continuing night after night, and the violence is just getting ramped up. However, this would all come to an end on April 18th, the day after Easter, and the priest who would go on to recount this said that a miracle happened on this day. So on this day, Ronald wakes up and he has this violent seizure, and afterwards he's yelling at the priest saying that Satan would always be with him. So the priests, they lay holy relics and crucifixes and medals and rosaries on the boy, and they begin another long day of battle. And finally at 10:45 p.m. the attending priest called on Saint Michael to expel Satan from Ronald's body. They shouted at Satan saying that Saint Michael would battle him for Ronald's soul. 7 minutes later, Ronald came out of his trance and said, "He's gone." And shortly thereafterward, when he came to his senses, he said that he had this great vision of Saint Michael vanquishing Satan on this great battlefield. And after this 3-month ordeal, it is said that he never again experienced these bizarre behaviors or these crazy ordeals. And it's actually said that he went on to live a pretty normal life, and he actually worked with the Apollo program in the 60s. And at the end of 2021, he was finally identified as Ronald Edwin Hunkler, who had died shortly before his 86th birthday in that year. So what can we say was going on during this incident? Because, you know, a natural skeptic like someone like myself might find some kind of psychological reason or cultural reason, or just demand some evidence to show, like, well, how do you know that this was demonic possession and not something else? And a lot of skeptics did come out and write books and stuff about this, which I won't really go into here, but you can find those books. They're out there. Go to Amazon. But given what we know from how the Catholic Church, for example, conducts these exorcisms, not all of these questions can always be answered, so you have to look into the supernatural. So I guess that leads us to the question, what exactly is possession? What is a demon? And why do demons possess people? Which is what I'll get into now. So this all comes from this very universal idea known as spirit possession. And when I say universal, it truly is. It's another one of these ideas that is found in almost every single culture on this planet, not just in Christian dogma, but throughout Buddhism, Islam, Hinduism, Wicca, Southeast Asian, African, and Oceanic traditions. It's an idea that goes back to the Paleolithic and the earliest humans on this planet, which is just another topic which rolls into the overarching theme of this series. Folkloric traditions that go back to the earliest humans and still exist to this very day. But what spirit possession is, it's an unusual or altered state of consciousness. A victim of spirit possession usually has the control of their body taken over by a malevolent spirit or a demon or a god or some vengeful entity. In the context in which it's found, possession can be considered voluntary or involuntary and may be considered to have either beneficial or detrimental effects on the host. More often they're detrimental effects and it's involuntary. Now, some of the voluntary accounts are usually from religious contexts where it's like, come into my body and give me some kind of divine power or divine healing or something like that. The involuntary ones are more malevolent. It's like, this demon got into my body and it's torturing me and it's gonna like drag me to hell or whatever. Or, you know, something along those lines. Maybe it's a malevolent spirit that's possessing somebody just to torture them out of some kind of revenge. But in the context of how we know it best here in America and in most of the Western world, that Christian context, they believe that the possession derives from the devil and his little arcade of minions, his demons. And this is part of their ongoing war with God in the heavens. You know, believers of this religion, they believe that the devil and his arcade of demons, they engage in spiritual attacks on humans, and they use their supernatural powers to physically or psychologically destroy them, or physically and psychologically encourage them to turn their backs on the church. And, you know, go around promoting atheism and joining the devil in his, like, I guess, march on heaven or whatever they believe will happen during the apocalypse. Because in the Christian context, heaven and hell, they're in this constant state of war, and their battleground is sometimes the humans that demons will come to possess. And the act of exorcising these demons demons is how the Christians basically send them back to that realm of hell. And every different culture or religion kind of has differing opinions on why these particular people were chosen for this. In the Catholic sense, the person is involuntarily chosen. They're just some random person. However, in like the Baptist sense, they're another sect of Christianity. They believe that it's people who dabble in the dark arts or the occult or play around with Ouija boards or whatever, engage in Wicca and witchcraft. They become the vessels for demonic possession because they're dabbling with those dark arts and they're allowing those demons to come through. And the evangelicals, who are another Christian sect who are actually largely to blame for a lot of America's current problems, they have this belief that possession by demons is a little more subtle most of the time, and that individuals or groups during a church service or whatever can cast these demons out, and they're the ones that believe that these demons are the ones responsible for things like homosexuality or drug addiction or pornographic addiction or, whatever they decide to hate at the time. However, they also believe that one cannot become possessed if somebody has accepted Christ into their life via the Holy Spirit, via baptism, which I guess is their get out of jail free card for being a terrible human being. But in their eyes, no matter what horrible atrocities they commit or what hatred they spread or whatever psychotic politicians they put into political power because they are a huge voting segment of our population, they will always see themselves as the good guys who did God's will because they are bathed in the Holy Spirit, but I digress. So even in that realm of Western theology alone, there's all these differing reasons for why and how a person can become possessed. And even in other cultures, there are similar ideas, like in a lot of Islamic culture, for example, sleeping near a graveyard or a tomb is believed to enable contact with the ghosts of the dead, who will visit the sleeper in dreams and provide hidden knowledge. And in some of those cultures, there's this form of possession which takes place by an Afrit. It's a vengeful ghost, and it's said to grant to possess some supernatural powers, but it drives them insane. And I think that also comes from the act of sleeping near a graveyard. And even in South Africa, there's this belief in spirit possession from the Zesabi, or Xhosa speaking people, and they believe that married women have this condition of spirit possession called Nwatso, and those who develop the condition are regarded as having special calling to divine the future. They are first treated with sympathy and then with respect, as they allegedly develop this divine ability to tell the future. And the lists of this go on and on. You can look into cultural practices all over the world and find some form of spirit possession, whether demonic and evil or good and enlightening. But the gist of it all is always the same. A person is either voluntarily or involuntarily chosen by a specific deity or entity or demonic entity or some kind of spirit which takes over their body. Usually it takes control of their body, and it will either impart knowledge, it will speak through them, it will harm them, it will heal them. It just depends on the context of the nature of the religion you subscribe to and your worldview. And with that being said, it is kind of interesting how this kind of idea permeates all cultures, but it really comes from a human's ability to fear the unknown. And for as long as humans have been on this planet, we've always kind of had this fear or anxiety surrounding the unknown, especially when it comes to ideas of mortality or the soul or what's going to happen to our soul when we die. The thought that an angry god could cast us into another world with demons, or that the angry spirit of someone you wrong can come back and possess your wife, or those general anxieties of the things that go bump in the night, those noises you hear when you're laying there all alone, or when you're out in the woods and those mysterious footsteps are following you and you turn around and there's nothing there, or the thought that one day you're perfectly fine and free or just living your life, and then all of a sudden, out of nowhere, your body becomes the property of something else, and that you no longer have control over your actions or maybe even your thoughts. Naturally, those ideas and anxieties would then go on to create the ideas of malevolent spirits or demons who possess these supernatural powers, who may be able to force you to do something against your own will. Or in other cultures where the opposite is true, where these spirits are invoked to impart knowledge or to give us some kind of healing. Those stories may have came from the general anxiety that we can't control the world around us. However, there may be something out there in the supernatural realm which may help us be able to gain some control or some knowledge over our surroundings. And those ideas, those fears, those anxieties, they are probably our most human trait. Now, at the end of the day, I am pretty fucking far from an expert on this subject. I have no way of knowing whether or not the possession of Ronald Doe was real. We do know he was a real guy. We do know that he underwent this exorcism, but did a demonic entity in the fight between heaven and hell enter his body and have this spiritual warfare? We have no way of knowing for sure. But when you do have a supernatural phenomena which is associated with almost every culture on this planet, there has to be some seed of truth, whether it's cultural, religious, biological, or whatever, because these ideas don't spring up overnight. They evolve over thousands and thousands of years. But for myself, going off my own personal beliefs and my gut feeling about it, yeah, the dude was possessed. Some malevolent entity did enter that kid's body and those priests had to cast it out. And to be honest, everything else surrounding it is just speculation. However, that iconic exorcism did lead to a book which led to one of the greatest horror films of all time. And it went on to inspire and launch entire series of films within that same kind of paranormal horror genre. And people are still making films inspired by and influenced by that story to this very day. And while we can't say, yeah, that's Hollywood, a lot of that stuff is exaggerated, it's not very realistic, and I would say, well, duh. It kind of hits upon that base instinct, that fear-based instinct in all of us to remember that not everything is always what it seems at face value. And to remember that there are powerful and malevolent forces out there in the world that will sometimes just fuck with you just for the fun of it. And despite everything you try, there's generally nothing you can do about it. So maybe next time when you're scrying or divining or just generally fucking around with a Ouija board, just remember to treat whatever kind of entity you may be acting with a little bit of respect. Don't piss it off. Don't give it a reason to possess you, because you might end up vomiting pea soup at a priest and spinning your head around, and then you'll have to listen to your own story being told on a crappy podcast in an oversaturated genre. But on that note, I think I am going to end it here. To be honest, this episode actually turned out to be a lot shorter than I initially thought it was going to be. However, when I dove into this outside of the Hollywood realm, there really isn't a lot of source material to work with when it comes to the idea of exorcism or demons, at least without doing some extreme deep dives into some very esoteric subjects which just lead into other rabbit holes which lead into other subjects, and you can create entire episodes for an entire series on. But in this case, for the sake of my own sanity, I just wanted to keep this one short and simple. And don't worry, I will definitely revisit the topic in the future. It might be shorter episodes just discussing the stories of what happened to other individuals during other exorcisms, and we might focus on some specific demonology stuff in the future. Maybe I'll just create like 50 little 5-minute segments and shove them all together in one single long documentary. I don't know. But let me know what you think. As always, your feedback is greatly appreciated, and I listen to every little snippet of it. Be sure to follow it and like it on all the platforms. Check out the Instagram. That's kind of the behind the scenes stuff. I'll be honest, that's mostly beer related. Send your donations to that Spotify link in the description. It's as little as $1 a month. That really goes a long way towards improving the show, buying and upgrading new equipment. Every dime I get from that, I put right back into the podcast. I don't use any of it for my own personal stuff, not even beer. And to be honest, if you don't feel like doing any of that stuff, I don't blame you. I wouldn't either. But if you somehow manage to make it this far in the episode without shutting it off, just do me a solid and tell a friend about this show. This show is very small and it is kind of a niche genre, so it doesn't really show up in a lot of the charts on like Spotify or Apple Podcasts or anything. So word of mouth is really the best way to grow this show, and that all comes down to you listeners. And that's actually true. I do have evidence of that. It's from your guys' word of mouth where this little show has showed up in places that I never expected it to. Hell, the last country that showed up on my analytics just a few days ago was Singapore, which is like the 27th random country it showed up in. So shout out to the 1 or 2 guys that listen to me in Singapore, plus all the people that's listened to me in all the other countries. But on that note, I do truly thank you for listening. Once again, this is Mike, and I will see you in the next episode.